It's a tradition of this conference that at the end I try to summarize all the wealth of discussion and information and contribution that we got over the 2 days, just to bring it to mind again, but also to thank all the participants also in the room for their participation. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we come close to this 2 days journey. Let's take a moment to reflect about what we experienced in the last 2 days. For me, it was a little bit like a tapestry being woven in front of our eyes with different colors, different textures. We had budgetary autonomy, internal market, payment sanctions, a lot of different things, but they all brought together create now a vivid narrative of the European Union evolving pursuit of the autonomy and unity in an ever-changing world. As we live today, this tapestry is not complete, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the conference, the discussions we had in the past 2 days should add a new layer that we should bring forward, all of us, and maybe let us continue this conversation. We have explored not just policies and legal frameworks, but also the very essence of what it means to build Europe in a way capable of navigating crisis while upholding its foundational values. Each session has created a building block, a step forward in defining the role of law in the EU ongoing evolution. So allow me to just go briefly through what we have seen. So yesterday we began by delving into the evolving dynamics of the EU budgetary autonomy and governance, particularly in times of crisis. Bruno De Witte reminded us of the need to rethink the EU budgetary framework as a governance tool. He talks about governing by financing. Alberto De Gregorio noted that the challenge in front of us is to transform ad hoc solutions in institutional structures, and he sketched the legal challenges of raising EU taxes, the next big question in EMU law. Paul Dermine aptly pointed out, common debt is a double-edged sword. While it strengthens our financial autonomy, it also exposes vulnerabilities in the absence of direct EU taxing powers. Cristina Fasone looked into the spending side and navigated the possibility of a more evolutive interpretation of the treaties to enhance solidarity and budgetary autonomy. And she also asked the most important question of accountability of this evolving framework. In the discussion, the issue of the timely approach was raised, the intergeneration equity, by underlining that the choice between taxation and borrowing is also a choice between generations. The key takeaway here is clear. The EU objectives increasingly demand European public resources and not just regulatory tools. However, with financial autonomy comes legal and political responsibility. Joint borrowing offers immense potential, but also raises institutional risks. To move forward, we must consider an evolutive interpretation of treaties that balances centralization with solidarity while being aware of the limits it poses. From funding, then, we turn to the internal market, a cornerstone of European integration and a key driver of European autonomy. Isabel Schnabel reminded us of its strategic importance in time of crisis, not only a mechanism for a more efficient allocation of resources, but also a tool for strategic depth and autonomy. She mentioned that the existing internal barriers to the provision of services equate to more than 100% of customs. That was an IMF analysis, I believe. And these are in our hands to eliminate. Catherine Barnett highlighted the delicate interplay between the single market, legal autonomy, and fundamental rights, cautioning us against derogations, so under public policy, public health, and public security labels, that could undermine these essential pillars, and mentioned the need for limiting the margin of appreciation by requiring the provision of evidence on the reasons for applying derogations and by demonstrating proper decision-making process. Emanuele Rebasti described the fundamental shift occurring in the area of emergency law, where emergency measures have been adopted by the Union on the basis of internal market legal basis. He spoke about the shift from liberalization to interventionism, with crisis embedding strategic autonomy into internal market as a legal and operational objective. Larissa Dragomir then made a compelling case for deeper financial integration through initiatives like the Savings and Investment Union. Here also we see a narrative of evolution. The internal market is no longer just an economic instrument. It is a promoter of EU strategic autonomy. As crises have shown us, the internal market must be adaptable, capable of shifting from liberalization to targeted interventionism when necessary. And we need to eliminate barriers that still exist among our member states. Our third panel brought us to the forefront of technology and finance, exploring the future of payment systems and the EU's autonomy into this critical domain. Piero Cipollone outlined the ECB three priorities: the digital euro, the strengthening of the internal market, and the supporting of cross-border payment innovation under the G20 agenda. Ruth van Heuvel underscored the EU efforts to reduce fragmentation via SEPA, EPI, and open banking, while stressing the paramount importance of cybersecurity and public-private collaboration. Douglas Arner illuminated the geopolitical dimension of the currency autonomy, while Desi Gucheva-Chetanova introduced the BIS initiatives like Project Nexus, which aim to enhance cross-border payment system through interoperability. What emerged from this discussion is a vision of autonomy through payments. The digital euro and initiatives like SEPA and EPI are not just technical projects, they are strategic moves to reduce reliance on non-European infrastructure and to strengthen the internal market and international cooperation. An important point was made clear: technology is no longer the main hurdle. What now dominates the conversation are regulatory inconsistencies and legal feasibility. The law is now at the center of the discussion. At the end of the first day, we were brought back to the bedrock of it all, the rule of law. The keynote speech of Suzanne Hébert reminded us that the rule of law is not merely a formality. It is the foundation of democracy itself. It demands that the laws are binding, courts are independent, and justice is impartial. Today, we face a world where autocrats manipulate or ignore laws, where powerful actors disregard legal systems, and where even the language of democracy is hijacked and abused. As guardians of the legal order, we must ensure that we do not dismiss the political or judicial system because of their imperfections, because this plays the game of the autocrats, and that the law is not reduced to formalism, but used as a tool to address urgent challenges, from defending judicial independence to greening markets. Over dinner, our President, Madame Lagarde, emphasized how European autonomy is defined by collective action, shared sovereignty, and a deep commitment to the rule of law. She highlighted the Europe model of autonomy, which is distinct from others. It is balancing decisiveness with multilateral cooperation and international legal obligations. She also brought to the picture the independence of central bank, which is presented as a cornerstone of an autonomy based on the rule of law and of trust on the institutions. I think her call to Europe to remain bold yet collaborative, independent yet interconnected, was a powerful reminder of what Europe stands for. Today, our day started with three concepts that structure the forms of cooperation between the Union and the rest of the world: extraterritoriality, equivalence, and mutual recognition. In this panel, Pete Heckhout highlighted the challenges of achieving multilateralism in financial services, a field historically resistant to international cooperation. Matthias Lehmann reminded us that in an interconnected world, extraterritoriality is not only inevitable, but essential. He explored the nuances of equivalence and mutual recognition and advocated for equivalence as the sweet spot for balancing open markets and stability, contrasting it with the deeper trust required for mutual recognition. Raffaella Setta explored equivalence as a flexible, policy-oriented, discretionary EU tool to manage risk and promote resilient markets. She stressed its strategic and political dimension, noting its role in fostering international cooperation. And finally, George Johnston focused on cross-border resolution regime for failing global financial institutions, underlining the importance of international cooperation to ensure legal effectiveness and manage complex crises. His specific examples put flesh to the bone of recognizing equivalence. Equivalence emerged as a regulatory tool that cannot be separated from political assessment. Equivalence allows balancing EU interests and cooperation with third countries. Despite its discretionary character, however, it remains rule-bound and has to be exercised with due consideration to the rule of law. In the next panel, we visited two powerful vectors of disruption, some would even say fragmenting the economic order, international economic order, sanctions and tariff. Juliane Cocotte set the scene, highlighting the relevance of judicial oversight also on this very political area, and also the question of who develops international law. Christoph Herrmann painted a rather bleak picture, I would say, of today's international economic system as one of rivalry, with the WTO in crisis and trade wars replacing cooperation. He suggested interpretations of EU law to adopt to this geoeconomic conflict, all while upholding the rule of law. Frank Hofmeister highlighted the EU evolving sanction regime, particularly in freezing Russian assets and redirecting profits to Ukraine, while emphasizing the need to ensure compliance with international law. He also discussed tools like the anti-coercion instrument to counter economic coercion, stressing the importance of expanding the EU toolkit to meet new foreign policy challenges. Laila Medina offered the judicial perspective, affirming the Court of Justice of the EU role in ensuring that all measures, including sanctions, comply with the rule of law, proportionality, and fundamental rights. She rejected the idea of departing from these principles, instead advocating for innovative legal solutions to meet global challenges while maintaining the EU constitutional commitment. In the area of tariffs and trade, the challenge is one of squaring resolute response to geoeconomic conflicts while preserving the rule of law. Judge Reina, in a very interesting discussion that followed, brought many interesting points from her experience as judge dealing with sanctions, and one very interesting point that resonates to quite some of the discussion we are having, the role of EU in developing customary international law. The last panel focused on the relationship between courts and the administration within the broader context of a system based on the rule of law. Frank Elderson set the scene, giving us the possible models of structuring such a relationship and the way it might reflect greater trust or mistrust in the administration. The panelists, Nicolas Emiliu, Pedro Machado, and Mariolina Liantonio, explored this phenomenon through a comparative lens, focusing on legislative measures and judicial decisions. The speakers debated two opposing perspectives. On the one hand, whether administrative discretion should be tightly controlled due to mistrust, as seen in the US trend towards curtailing agency power. On the other hand, whether independent discretion is essential for effective governance, as reflected in the EU differential approach to institutional expertise. At the heart of the discussion was the question posed by Frank: how should independent administration balance its discretion with the principles of the rule of law? Nicolas Emiliu highlighted the Court of Justice approach in Crédit Lyonnais, which preserves institutional balance by granting deference to the discretionary power of the EU institutions, particularly in areas requiring technical expertise. Pedro Machado contributed his experience as supervisor and highlighted that independent discretion is a key for a system of effective supervision. He offered some comparative insights with the US, which Mariolina Liantonio further developed. Mariolina put the EU and US experience next to each other, explaining in detail differences and similarities. Both systems face the challenge of balancing discretion with accountability and have their own ways of resolving the dilemma. I think this comparative perspective is very interesting because through comparison, we understand who we really are and where we stand on this major debate. And then we had this round table, the role of the legal services in defending the rule of law. And here we heard from Daniel, the Commission, guardian of the treaty and of the rule of law, does it through, first, the infringement procedures, second, the participation in cases referred by the national judges, and third, by participating into the rule of law report that the Commission produces. The Parliament, coordinating with the legal services of other institutions in the adoption of important legislation that promote the rule of law. We also heard about some difficulties in making clear that the legal opinion is independent and being able to pass it through. But I have full confidence that Freddie is very persistent, and he manages to resist even temptations of corruption, I would say, to change the legal opinion. We heard from Lucia the role of the legal service in a national central bank, the double role that is there, which is not contradictory, rather complementary. And in fact, probably the primacy principle helps in reorganizing the two legal systems. And we heard from Jan the role of the IMF legal service, the key principles of independence and objectivity and of proactive engagement under which they operate, and the fact that they feel interpreters and guardians of the bandit. The IMF, of course, is a little bit different from our legal system because of the lack of judicial review, apart from the personnel relationship, so that the fund is the sole judge of its legitimacy, and that, I would say, makes the role of legal service in that context also very, very important to advise in taking those decisions on the interpretation. So we come to the end of the summary, and I would like to now really thank all our panelists, those who are still in the room. The others I will send an email later on, because this panelists, speakers, contributors, and also from the audience really enrich the event. The discussion is animated, and this really makes it very, very valuable. I also would like to extend my thanks to Frank. I will tell him separately, Frank Helderson, our board member, because he's always extremely supportive of this type of event. And I would also like to thank the colleagues of the ECB Legal Service who sit especially in that area there. First of all, to Michael Ioannidis, who you also heard, he asked a couple of questions, but he really is the soul behind the organization of the conception and the organization of all this conference, and took the lead in this and really put a lot of effort into this. Monica, who is sitting there, is the coordinator of a fantastic team composed by Kinga, Michelle, Clara, Sandra, and Rita, who also, all of them help. But Monica, I think she spent many nights in the last week as well on this issue. So thank you so much. Nothing could be possible if the good organization is not behind it. And there are so many other legal people. There are also other people, of course, who have contributed in producing ideas, which panel should we take, et cetera, from legal service in particular, but also from other areas. I cannot name them all, but those I've named are really the ones that deserve your applause. So thank you again. Let me conclude that we should take, I think, 3 lessons with us after this conference. First, that the journey of the EU towards autonomy requires careful attention to its rules. We cannot imagine to jump somewhere. We need to be very careful about the process, and the rules need to be looked at. The second, that the crises, even when disruptive, are also occasion and catalyst for progress. And if we try to face them with agility and purpose, it could be a stimulus to actual further integration. And the third is maybe a little bit overlapping with the other two, but that the rule of law and the respect of fundamental principles must remain our guiding star, even under pressure, and shortcuts will not help. So, ladies and gentlemen, the tapestry we have woven is not merely an academic exercise, it's really a vision for the future of Europe. It is a call for action for policymakers, legal experts, and citizens alike. Let us all take up this call. Let us leave here inspired, ready to take the threads of this discussion and weave them into the fabric of a stronger, more united European Union. I look forward to continuing this journey with all of you in the years to come. Thank you. Have a nice trip back home. And I hope to see you soon somewhere to discuss further. Thank you.